Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us as part of this public art exchange forecast public art and Atlanta Beltline conversation, a route to real change, accessibility and community building with Native artists, with our artists, Mona Cliff, Gregg Deal, and Brooke Smiley. We are about to get going. Just a couple of etiquette reminders as we move through this conversation. This is going to be very fluid, facilitated by Mark Salinas and myself, and as we talk to the artists who have graciously agreed to help us build this conversation and world together. And make sure your mics are muted. We are recording, so this will eventually be for posterity and sharing out to our larger communities. So if you don't wish to be on camera, make sure that your video is turned off. And once again, we'll give it a couple more minutes to let a few more folks in the room, and then we will get going. If you have questions, please drop them into the Q&A, and we will get to them at the end of the conversation. All right, we're going to go ahead and get rolling. Okay, so why we're all here. We're here as part of public art exchanges initiatives to have these really grounding and real conversations around the public art field. And one of the issues near and dear to my heart and near to Mark's heart and the artists who are here today is what it looks like to build relationships and communities with Native artists, particularly as their work pertains to our public art field and in a public art practice, and what the many layers of that holds. I am Miranda Kyle. I'm the Arts and Culture Program Manager for Atlanta Beltline, Inc., and I am located on the traditional homelands of the Muskogee and the Cherokee peoples here in the southeastern United States. Here in the Southeast, there is very little public acknowledgement, understanding, and visibility of artists who are practicing contemporary art and who are making and thinking about big public art projects and are integrated into our public art systems. So this conversation really bore out of a need I saw in my own community. And as I reached out into this network of public art administrators and artists that I work with, it resonated with a lot of people. So I'm very happy to be in conversation with some of the brilliant minds who want to extend that conversation. And I am excited that you're here to be a part of it, and we can all learn through this process together. And with that, I would like to introduce my co-facilitator in this conversation, Mark Salinas. And then after that, we'll hand it off to the artists for them to discuss themselves a little bit before we get into talks.
Thanks, Miranda. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Salinas. I'm the Senior Project Manager at Forecast Public Art. I'm located here in Nevada, land of the Washoe, Shoshone, and Paiutes people, past and present. Specifically, I work remotely here in Reno. Really honored to be among this panel and flattered to be invited to co-moderate this. Here in Nevada, there's a lot of intersectionality of obstacles towards public art, whether that's social, financial, or geographic. It's all about accessibility, and I'm really excited to take part of this in an intercultural approach to support and uplift some of the same goals and share some of the same trials and celebrations with this panel. So thank you for allowing me to be among you. And I'll pass it to Mona to give yourself a little introduction to our audience.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Mona Cliff. I'm an enrolled member of the Aananen tribe at Fort Belknap, Montana. I'm currently residing in Lawrence, Kansas, the traditional territories of the Kaw, Kansa, and Osage nations. I'm a mother of 3 and a full-time practicing artist. Thank you.
All right, let's see who's next. Gregg.
Hi, I'm Gregg Deal. Oh, I miss my hair. I am a full-time working artist, contemporary artist, working in a number of different mediums. I'm currently residing in Colorado, by way of Washington, D.C., by way of Utah, where I grew up. And I'm just happy to be here.
All right, Brooke.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brooke Smiley. I am a Jaje'i Osage here on Chumash territory, where coastal Salinas band and Barbareño bands live. And I'm an interdisciplinary artist, body-based, and I work across the fields of dance, somatic education, and public earth art and architecture. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be a part of this panel and excited for this conversation.
Thanks so much, y'all. We've had so many really beautiful conversations, and so I'm gonna let Mark kind of lead us into the first little bit of this really meaty topic.
Yeah, we had a lot of great warm-up discussions that just could just go on and on, right, Miranda, with this group. So, I want these our audiences here today to get familiar with you, and so I was hoping I could go through, ask each one of our artists here today just to tell us a little bit about your practice in general and how that reflects your personal identities in what you do. Mona, do you mind if we start with you?
No. Okay, where do I start? I guess I could kind of start in the beginning just a bit. I did go to a private art school in Seattle, and I did get a formal education in printmaking, but that experience left me wanting, while I love the materials and, the processes of printmaking and painting, I didn't feel a true connection to those materials. And so right around the senior year, I asked my grandmother how to teach me how to do beadwork, because that's such a prevalent part of our culture and the things that we do and share in giving and just different aspects of our Native American culture. Especially beadwork is very, very important. And so I learned to do beadwork, and then from these last recent years, I kind of was in a self-imposed residency of learning traditional arts, self-teaching, and just learning from, the glory of YouTube. And so that really, once I kind of decided to come back into my contemporary practice, after raising 3 kids, and doing traditional arts and, helping my community by doing beadwork and just the traditional arts that I can offer to help them through their ceremonies. I wanted to, because I had such a strong connection to those materials, I wanted to bring that into my contemporary practice because I wanted to push those materials as well. And so because that's a part of my identity as a Native woman, and my role in my community and how I'm helping my community, I really felt that I needed to bring those materials back into because I needed to broaden also a lot of non-natives ideas and preconceptions of like what Native art is. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I mean, I'm a multidisciplinary artist. So I work in a lot of different mediums. The other one is fabric applique, but beadwork is my main focus. So yeah, and the public art aspect was an opportunity that I had received, a local opportunity to do public art. And through that experience, I really began to understand the importance of public art, and especially whose voices are being given a chance to talk and speak. So that's kind of where now including, so that's where the whole multidisciplinary part comes in. It's like public art and, just going through these processes and building my skill set as an artist. Yeah.
Great. Greg, let's move to you. Tell us about the identities that you, how you self-identify, father, artist, activist, and how your art elevates that, amplifies those.
Don't forget
Yeah.
punk rocker. That's an important one in there too.
It's actually, the farther I go along, you start kind of looking at the words that describe us. And activist is a really weird term for me, because I really feel like that, like when one person calls an activist, another calls an adult with an opinion. It really depends on who's speaking or who has the microphone. Because oftentimes, like, so much of my work is really obviously I'm participating in a number of different mediums. I was trained in painting. I started diving into performance art after spending several weeks with James Luna at the Venice Biennale in 2005. And then into this, as I think a lot of artists do, exploration of different mediums. Because like once you gain any sort of notoriety, it almost gives you permission to sort of explore other places legitimately. And I don't know why that is, because I think it's all legitimate, really. But within all of that is this voice, right? This voice that I know that I actively try to suppress, and that just sort of came through. And you can call it activism, but really what it is things that we're dealing with as Indigenous people in our everyday life. And I think that sort of in the realm of commodifying these voices and commodifying the issues that are attached to these voices, as is happening now, it's really difficult to discern, like, am I advocating for change, or am I expressing something that is a legitimate part of my experience of being an Indigenous person on this continent. So when I was living in Washington, D.C., I was one of many faces. It was part of the mascot debate. And somebody had said, well, you're only talking about that because it gives you an advantage, a leg up on your work, without realizing that, like, I'm a father who has kids and, like, living in the Washington, D.C. area, and that we're literally trying to traverse this exact issue where I'm coaching my kids to, like, this is what we talk in our home, but don't talk like that at school, because you might be bullied by another kid, or what my biggest concern was, by an educator who decides their fandom is more important than them being an educator. And so a lot of the things that exist in my work, while it's social and political and cultural, I think that those things all tie to our communities. They're true for our living experience as well. And so it's an interesting quandary, like, in terms of what I'm looking at, because at the end of the day, like, I sincerely do not wake up saying, well, what can I say in behalf of Indian country? That's not my goal. I speak in behalf of my experience, which of course can have a shared experience, and I accept that as part of the work as well. I don't know if any of this is answering your question, but but there you go.
All good, Greg. You are. Yes. Brooke, let's move on to you. I'm curious about your relationship as a performing artist, with the earth, and that identity that you hold, and how your practice met that identity.
Well, really feel like movement and touch are some of my and all of our first languages. And I I studied dance. I danced ever since I was begging my mom to take me to go dance. Um, and it wasn't until, you know, growing up and I went overseas on a scholarship and earned my master's and was dancing in companies because there was a lot of support for dance artists overseas. And I would always do projects, and then on the side, I'm from a family of builders. So I spent, not gonna say all my childhood, but I spent, so many hours underneath houses, listening to water systems and helping, my dad and brother build, because that's how we spent time together. And I never knew that spending so many hours, listening to like water, as I grow older, I'm listening to the other elements around me, of how much in tune and in sensitivity I am to working with, and collaborating with environment. Um, and it wasn't until something happened to my own health as a woman where I started building with the earth, and building in the round, and working a part of, different Native communities where we're building and we're growing something together across generations. So something that brought me into public art and sculpture from a dance artist and body-based, body lens is, when you look at an arch, where is the strengths, where are the weak points in an arch? And I'm sensitive to that in my own body and into other bodies. And I would also say a big piece is that when I was overseas, people would watch me dance and they would be like, yeah, but where are you from? Yeah, but where are you from? And I'm mixed race. It's my dad, it's my grandfather that's from the Osage Nation, and it's been a big healing journey for me and my family. And I think that's what gave me the courage to begin to speak up and find ways to speak and to see myself, is because I know that I'm part of many finding their ways back, through language and through cultural spaces. So what brings me to the earth is I feel like when I'm in touch with it, it brings out a truth that's deeper than my own. And I feel like when I'm in relationship with other people, we can come together on our work ethics. We can come together through, what makes us real, what makes us human. And I feel like that surpasses a lot of barriers that I've recently, and many people have mentioned and are experiencing in society. And I feel like through process driven work, there's opportunities to meet and come together and be real people to each other instead of stereotypes or, who knows what. Thanks for the opportunity to touch on some of those.
Yeah, thank you. I
Thanks,
mean,
Brooke.
as contemporary artists, right? Was there a moment or a project or a person that you encountered that made you feel, oh, this is changing. My own practice is public now.
And I would go ahead and encourage you guys all to unmute yourselves. That way we can kind of flow more into a conversational back and forth, and interrupt each other as appropriate. So
I mean, for you, Mona, it was a self-directed approach, learning from your grandmother, your self-directed residency.
Yeah,
was
I
there,
would
was there a
also.
tipping point where it's like, wow, this is, there's a saying that presentation is 50%.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes that 50% is invited, sometimes they make their themselves comfortable and come on in the door. But was there any piece that sort of like made you consider yourself as a contemporary public artist?
Well, you know, having practiced art back in the day, I don't want to date myself too much, but I kind of felt like where I resided was either or at that time, and pushing those boundaries, you know, in the late 90s. um, there, you know, people as artists, we are kind of expected to push those boundaries as contemporary artists. And then there's this traditional art aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And there seems to be these categories that we all need to reside within. And there are people and artists who break those boundaries. And for a long time, because of my formal training, I felt like I could only be in one space, like the contemporary art space, and not bring those traditional arts in. And so honestly, I spent a lot of time trying to forget my formal art training as a person. It was great. I loved it. But, you know, and then also moving through my world and my cultural systems, you know, as a woman and these roles that I have, that need to be able to self-direct and create and constantly be learning as an artist too. Those two came together at a certain point when I realized that I couldn't just function in one space or the other. I had to bring those two together as a person, as a woman. And so it was actually just honestly in 2018 is when I came back into my contemporary practice, but brought those traditional materials with me. And that's kind of jumping that line as a person was a really transformative in my entire practice. You know, it's just, I think that's something that I can't speak for other artists, but as a Native woman and a Native artist, it's kind of something that I'm constantly trying to navigate as a person, and what my identity is, what expectations are from other people, and what my own expectations are of myself. And then how do I narrate that for the public and the people, and still stay true to my own experience. And so there was an incident. It was, you know, in 2018 where I had an experience where somebody wanted me to recreate some beadwork. Was not my design, and I was very uncomfortable with that. And so that's when I decided that I wanted to kind of move beyond that point, and come back into my practice, because I had been seesawing back and forth for quite a few years. And my husband, I think, got tired of me like being wishy-washy, was like, just, you know, go, you know, he's like, just make art if you're going to make art. And so there was an instant, you know, a time when I submitted my art. It was beadwork to a contemporary show, and it was accepted. And that really kind of gave me the boost that I needed to know that I could do that and move forward. And so now the screen that you're looking at with all of my beadwork, I can see, like, in just 3 years, that giving myself permission to kind of move through my own narratives is really kind of like that transformative part, is giving myself permission to allow myself to express myself in these different modes in my identity. So that answers your question.
Yeah. Brooke, you were nodding your head. A couple of these key moments when Mona was speaking about having to bring these identities together, having to, what was going on in your mind there?
Personal permission process. That's huge. That's everything. And the multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, interdisciplinary, you know, there's, it's like, I'm complex. You know, we're complex. It's all complex. And I'm whole, you know, I'm a whole person. I'm a real person. We're all real. And I think something that I really tapped into what you shared, Mona, was like doing it for yourself and answering to that in yourself. And I really resonate with that because, you know, as a part of my path, you know, is like unwinding a lot of trauma. And a part of what I'm observing about that is ability to stay in confusion states for a long time. And with that, in my own practices, like, okay, well, in the earth building world, you know, like I'm known as this and we do this and I fit in small places or whatever, you know, and or in the dancing world, you know, I do this. And it's like, I think it really is shifting the culture and shifting the way that public art can be perceived and experienced with its, you know, with its complexity, with its, you know, invitation to bring more to the table than just one craft. And that I find the most exciting work is really that which draws off and across, you know, different knowledges and different ways of making. Thanks for asking, Mark.
I want to hop in really quickly, right? Because we're talking about this idea of process and time and its relationship to your making styles. And a lot of those words are very scary for public art administrators and curators who are like, okay, we've got 10 months in the fiscal year left to execute this thing and get this product rolling, right? And for artists who maybe have a traditional Eurocentric background in making, like you all have been formally trained, right? And then also maybe have the privilege of having worked in the world or the industry or apprenticed and have a fluidity with that sort of bureaucratic urgency that then translates into an expectation from administrators or the audience for a certain way of working or a certain way of delivering a product to a community. In all of our conversations, we had talked about how antithetical that really is to a true relationship building between curators and administrators working in public art and Native artists. And so I'm wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about what that looks like when we start talking about curator or audience expectations versus how you would like that collaboration to sort that energy to move into. You know, small thing, not super heavy content right off the bat, just light work. And Gregg, maybe that's something you could touch on because you've been, you know, doing these massive murals for a while.
Yeah, I think so much of it has to do with trust, and trusting an artist. You know, for I think average people can sometimes be difficult because so much of, I mean, in my own experience and my own process really ends up rooted in sort of existentialism, you know, is this, and each moment that I've had, you know, periods of growth have been rooted in a crisis of some sort. And so and not necessarily a bad crisis, you know, sometimes just asking a question like, why am I doing this and not doing this? And so, you know, that's some serious free thinking for the rest of a colonial world that is very structured, and has a very structured sense of how you speak, how you engage, how you talk, what these relationships look like, how those relationships function. And, you know, of course, at the root of that, money and what you're going to get for that money and how all of that's going to come through. And so there just has to be a significant amount of trust between these sort of left brain thinking administrators and like artists and how that's going to work together. And I've only found success in spaces where somebody trusts what I'm doing and trusts how I'm going forward with what I'm doing. Without that, there is no project. There's not going to be any success in the project. And maybe that's just black and white, and maybe, you know, that's my problem. I mean, Mona and Brooke are so lovely, and I feel like a bull in a china shop. Just like even when I try to softball something, I'm destroying everything in the process, you know. So I recognize that like I might have a little bit, there might be a little bit more aggression from like where I'm coming from, because not compromising those things has become paramount for me keeping the integrity of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And without that, the art dies, it falls flat on its face, you know. And it's one reason why I hate committees. I feel like art dies in committees. And so someone's like, hey, we want you to do a mural, and we have this committee that wants to decide, like I immediately will just peace out. I'll be like, nope, I'm good. Like I could point you to some artists that could probably do what you need, what you want to do. But having free range to work through that stuff can bring about the most beautiful and truthful and honest stuff that you can possibly conceive of. And restricting that takes away from the integrity of the work.
That's, I mean, you're basically saying all the scary words that public arts administrators, you know, deal with. Like, you know, a lot of us find sort of that CYA, right, in committees to be like, oh, well, we made sure to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. How, in this world where, you know, you have a lot of white administrators, you know, who are like, I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing and working towards equity in my public art program, and, you know, celebrating Indigenous voices at the table, and working towards this, having their work in public spaces, while they still have like these committees and a lot of this oversight, you know, that almost is a necessary point to have access to that sort of funding. How do y'all navigate this process, and how do we make it better, right? Like, Gregg, you talked about really being uncompromising and being like, listen, if you don't trust my vision, I'm out of here. So how do we as arts administrators and curators get to that point of trust? Like, how do we work towards trust to get to that point?
I would say just you know, like forming a relationship with trusted advisors and that don't have degrees. I think that's important for a lot of people to understand, that a lot of lived knowledge is more important than a piece of paper. There are many people out there who I know who have years, 20 plus years of lived experiences, who might be overlooked by academia, by organizations, because they don't have that degree. And I think that forming relationships with those people, and really, if you're going to be moving forward in any kind of project, really asking them for their advice, but also compensating them well, and making sure that you're treating them as you would any other advisor, you know, not just because they don't have some kind of formal education. I think that's really important. And kind of going back into kind of like timelines. I'm kind of facing that right now in this current project that we're planning. And some of the parts of what we want to do for events actually reside around, you know, Mother Nature. And like if we want to do a class about how to do preservation in certain plants, like how we did a long time ago, we can only go and process those fruits at a certain time of the year. And so I think that when that really starts at the beginning in the planning, like I think that people who have the ability to stretch those timelines should, and really be uncompromising when it comes to how a process is going to play out, that it can't fit these certain stages. Sometimes it needs to happen when it needs to happen. And that can be built in to the process. It doesn't have to be, I think that's really where things need to start, is the beginning process of that. And when they're, you know, deciding what needs to happen in a project. So yeah, I think those are, for me, key elements when it comes to any kind of public facing project, any kind of, you know, they're having an exhibit. I really think that people who are curators or, you know, exhibitors, they need to really solicit the advice of folks, and then really listen to what they want to be saying, not necessarily what they want to say. You know what I'm saying? That's a lot of, you know what I'm saying, but yeah.
Mm. I have a tip to add. You asked for a tip, Miranda. And what I hear Mona speaking to is, you know, at the very beginning of the process, you know, there's a check-in, there's a camaraderie, or there's a coming together. And so I'd like to suggest, uplift, you know, encourage arts administrators to have a discussion about what trust is, how they feel it in themselves, how they offer that to the people and the artists that they're working with. And my big tip is, like, invite local Native and Indigenous people to your board, to your committees, to the curators circles. And if they're not interested, you know, see what they're doing, and see what it's like to build slow relations. Because, you know, wouldn't it be so incredible if somebody was on the board that really understood process-based work or process-based relationship building?
That's a really
I
powerful
this is-
sentiment. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, I was going to say, I think that that's on the nose. I mean, every project that I've done that I feel like has any sort of worthwhile thing wasn't something that was thrown together at the last minute. I did an 80-foot mural, you know, down in downtown Colorado Springs. And I had built that relationship, and they had built that relationship with me over the course of a few years. And so when, like, a curator reaches out and wants to be friends, that actually really excites me, because I know that they're thinking about something and they're trying to build a relationship, and that time needs to be had, whether they're having that relationship with you from afar or they're beginning to have a relationship with you up close. Like, no good projects are coming up because they woke up one morning and said, hey, you know what, I think I want to do this, and we're going to do this, and I'll call them today. Like, that doesn't happen. These relationships are garnered over a series of years, which means they're rooted in community. There's an element of community attached to it that ends up becoming really important to the relationship, which allows me and them to navigate different mindsets and different mind thoughts to arrive in a place that's going to be most successful.
I would have to add, oh, I'm sorry. I mean, I think I'd have to add to, when you're talking about building those relationships, it needs to be beyond just checking boxes. Because I know and I see, and following kind of like what's happening in the arts industry, everybody's understanding that they need to diversify finally. And, you know, I think that checking boxes, it needs to become more than that, because I know that our education system is failing because there are people who don't really even know contemporary Native people exist. You know, they're not aware of that. And so their outlook on how they see and perceive everything is just, you know, it's really antiquated. And so now everybody's rushing to kind of get this approval that, yes, like, we're diversifying. So look, we have a Native right here, but it's not relationship building. It needs to be relationship building. It needs to be like, we care about your community. We're going to bring your community to our institution, to our organization, and help uplift that community too. It's not going to, it shouldn't be a one-way kind of relationship, like where you're only just taking. You need to give back too. And so I think that's important, and have it be beyond just checking that box to say, like, look, this is what we're doing to diversify. If that's, I just needed to add that little bit.
It's like the best evidence of having the capacity to build trust is the precedence of relationships that you have built.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not a garnish on the side of the plate. It's the main ingredient that, you know, from the get-go.
I think too, it's really important, especially with Native people in America, because most of these institutions are on Native land that was, you know, taken illegally a lot of times. And I feel that that is an opportunity to give back to these communities. I think that a lot of times when people think about Natives, it's like a side note almost, because there are so many other pressing marginalized voices that are out there. And, you know, thankfully, and social media has been really grateful for us because we've been able to advocate for ourselves, but that, you know, giving ourselves a voice. And, you know, I think that just, yeah, I lost my thought, but.
I'll pick it up. I'll pick up one, then you can take it.
Great.
I'm gonna toss the ball to you.
No. You know, what you're speaking to about organizations and building trust in communities. You know, I'm also sitting on a panel, a grant panel right now, for an agency, and the tokenization of like, okay, what's the demographics, right? So having a clear understanding of the demographics of your community, but also then moving beyond the boxes, because there's a lot of other natives who don't self-identify as that as well. And because it's complex and it's difficult. And I feel like, at least in my family, I'm a part of a generation where I'm trying to find the safety in my own body to be seen publicly as that, because of the barrage of a lot that comes with that. And so I'm getting off track. What I wanted to speak to was that, you know, what would it be like to partner with local organizations, with local Native organizations that already have programs in place, that already have seasonal activities, where you might invite them as guest curators, or you might see what programs are already working for them and see how public art can support or uplift or be like, you know, an enhancement to what they already see. That's help you.
Thanks, Brooke. I think that is a beautifully succinct way to I think segue into the next little bit that Mark is going to walk us through.
Yeah, we actually have a question here that popped up from Chris, and it's, can you speak to how an organization can rebuild trust? So I'm going to take from that question, maybe an organization faulted and they're looking to make amends. Or if there's, you know, like, you know, Gregg had mentioned, having authentic relationships, one-on-one, right? To get to an opportunity later on, to have that sort of, to plant the seed, to germinate an authentic communication line. I think it's also in who we put on our commissions and boards. And I think it's the, I was on a grants panel recently, and you know, the other panelists wanted more information on what is the diversity of the past artists that have received this award, the diversity of the past organizations that have received this grant. Who are your subcontractors? Who are your vendors? Show me the diversity in all of that. Don't show me the demographics of the city where you're having an event. Just because it's 25% Latino doesn't mean that event is going to bring those peoples through the door. So I think it's, you know, there's many ways to bring those voices in from the ground up.
Yeah, I think, just speaking from personal experience, I just started in a role last year as an advisor for the Kansas Creative Arts Industry Commission. And part of my duties is to connect people, grantee applicants, to Native communities. After reviewing grants, I realized that there were a lot of well-intentioned people who were building these programs without Native voices. And so I pointed that out. I said, you know, why aren't they reaching out to these communities? And what I realized is a lot of these people don't have those connections, or they're not surrounded or connected to a nearby tribe. And so that they, thankfully the director was like, well, let's start at the beginning. Let's make sure that when these people are applying for these grants, that we can connect them to those communities so that they can kind of build their grant around including Native voices. And so I think that's where being in this role, it's really made me realize how important it is building these structures from the very beginning and having advisors and that's also how you build relationships, is by saying, like whatever program you're going to have, having those voices included from the very beginning, and the directing the way that it's going to go, the events, the way that they're going to flow too. So that can be at every single level, even when it comes to funding things, you know what I mean? So building relationships is going to take time. And like I said, it needs to be reciprocal. It needs to be back and forth. It can't just be taking.
Otherwise it just becomes extractive. It becomes
yeah
a transaction.
But how do we do that? How do you do that as an institution? In an example here and nearby in Kansas City, there is one Indian center, an urban Indian center, and most cities have an Indian urban center because because of the Relocation Act. In the 50s, my grandparents were a part of that. They moved from rural, isolated Montana to LA, and one of the few places where natives could connect would be an Indian center. And so a lot of these Indian centers, this is what I've seen, is that, a museum or a gallery will be like, oh, I need Native representation. Let me contact the Indian Center. And so they kind of go extract, get what they need and leave. But these Indian centers are usually run just by just threads. They don't have a lot of funding, And so I think that's where these larger institutions could give back by helping them get funding so they can continue to fulfill their community role, so that they don't have to struggle. I mean, everybody's looking for funding everywhere. Everybody's trying to get funding. And so I think that when these little smaller organizations are being run on a shoestring budget, but yet people are wanting to come in and take from them, I think that's how they can give back, by helping them get the funding that they need to continue to serve the Native community.
Gregg, you're going to say something?
Yes.
Yeah, I think all of this actually points to the severe ineptitude of organizations that don't traditionally have people within their ranks. And sometimes even if they do have people in their ranks, they're not listening to these people that have insights that would actually help move these things forward. So the whole point of bringing in BIPOC people to just have discussions in places where there's public programming or there's public art or anything else that's happening along those lines is not a diversity hire. It's not any of those things. It's specifically so that these individuals can inform the space that are in there. I've been on committees where they're like, yeah, let's raise some money and gather clothes or coats or whatever so that we can send them to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And the only reason why they're saying Pine Ridge is because it's the only reservation people know of, without realizing that there are hundreds across the country. And even in the states in which you reside, you don't have to go to another state to do that. Like, I understand the desire to do that, but the truth is that like 70 to 8% of Native people don't even live on the reservation. Denver itself has, I believe, the third or fourth largest urban Native community in the country, because it too was a relocation space. And so without being able to be in those spaces and be like, look, why are you going to go to Pine Ridge? Why wouldn't you try to work with the Native people that are here in our city, in our community? Why wouldn't you want to work with that? And sometimes the answer is actually pretty stark and true, because it's not sexy enough, because it's not a real reservation or a real space. And so all this goes back to this place of public education and realizing that ineptitude is fed by generations of misunderstanding what Native people are, who Native people are, and that their history doesn't stop in the mid 1800s, but continues forward and is rooted in trauma and displacement and assimilation and abuse and all of these things. So it begs a question of like, why are there so many Native people in Denver? Why are there 40 or 50,000 Native people living in Denver? And there's a rabbit hole that's there that can actually be fed by public programming and by funding and relationships and all of those things. But we're not doing that because it doesn't fit the sort of colonial white savior sexy narrative of contributing to those organizations or those communities.
Or even if the work is about joy and
Yeah.
Indigenous futurisms and, you know, amazing things that are happening. I know one of our conversations that we had leading up to this panel, we had talked about one of the sentiments that I had overheard at Mona's show, where they were looking at all of this like stellar bead work and looking at some of the applique work that almost felt like graffiti, right? And had all these like incredible things. And they were like, I just don't see the Indian in it, right? And that was something that we had talked about leading up to this, is that saviorism obsession with like just the trauma stories and not the joy and expansiveness and multidisciplinariness that is also embodied by Indigenous artists who are making contemporary work. And that was another thing I wanted us to touch on too, right? Like that gaze, right? Like the white curator or non-Indigenous gaze, right, of the work that you make, right? And how better a collaborator, you know, non-Indigenous curators can be for y'all to decenter sort of that gaze of, you know, only wanting to see trauma stories or only wanting to see something that feels quote unquote overtly Indian, and how to ethically go about that work.
I can speak to that directly with a mural that I had done. And I use the words, my husband is an enrolled Osage member. And so we were teaching our kids, the Osage language. And so I wanted to normalize Osage orthography just in our spaces. And I wanted to make public art that was for our eyes only. And there were so many people that were insisting on explanations. And I was like, why do I have to explain this to you? I shouldn't have to explain this to you. This is for us. And like there needs to be more art that is only for us so that we can feel ourselves in our spaces. I mean, we have been marginalized, and it's the land that everybody is using is what we were caring for. We were caretakers for a millennia. And so, you know, to not have to explain the word people that's written in an Osage orthography on our land was kind of like a point where I didn't want to move from that. I didn't want to give an explanation. I felt that they just needed to be able to sit with it and have to be comfortable not having to know, you know, not having to know and need an explanation. I think that's another thing, is this kind of over insistency of like needing to understand what we're doing. And I mean, sometimes, you know, we need to work through that too. And so why should we have to explain everything? And then the added part of having to give history lessons. And so we're also being teachers and advisors and constantly moving through these spaces where we're having to explain ourselves, you know, that's also exhausting sometimes. Sometimes we just want to make something and create from our own experiences and just have people be able to sit without having to give a history lesson on it too. I mean, we have computers at our fingertips. Anybody can Google anything. It's like, you know, why should you rely on the person in front of you to be, you know, your historian? It's exhausting sometimes, you know? And so with that public art, I think that that's my main goal, is to normalize like Native joy without explanation, you know, like without having to, yeah, give history lessons.
That's beautiful, Mona. Yeah. I mean, it's the double burden of being the bearer of the trauma and the educator to others of why that's traumatizing of the history.
Exactly. And, you know, and honestly, in my own art, I made a lot of reactive art the last couple years, you know, and I really, those issues like, you know, MMIW, like there's issues that I feel very passionately about, but I also need to understand as a person, it's like, what is my intention behind creating art that surrounds that issue, you know? And so that's when I had made a conscious shift in my own practice to only focus on embodying these parts of our experience as Native people, that to me are the more important parts, like being generous. Like generosity is a huge part in our culture. Having giveaways. So a lot of people don't even understand like the concept of like what a giveaway is. With beadwork, you know, beads in themselves are not materially like expensive, that, you know, but it's the time that goes behind that and creating that piece and then giving it to somebody with your intentions. Those are the parts that I want to embody in my own art and uplift that part of our culture, you know. And I think that a lot of times these people who are in these institutions, they might not understand those concepts. And so I think that, you know, maybe what they can only understand is the trauma, you know, because whatever their experiences are. And so I think that having to move past that and allowing people to express themselves within these narratives of joy, within these narratives of like honoring and uplifting, I think that that really needs to kind of, trauma is important to address it, but it's not the entirety of who we are.
We're worth more than our trauma.
Yeah.
We're worth more than our labor, and we're worth more than the stories that are fantasized. And we all deserve a chance to move through those stereotypes with learning, like true learning, which means, you know, kind of erasing some of the things that aren't helpful for any of us anymore. I really appreciate the question, Chris, because it's such a big question, and it also, you know, I'm so curious where it's coming from, what the intention is behind learning about trust. And I just want to uplift accountability, and accountability comes from what relative safety is too, and you know, where spaces can be comfortable again, and where there can be genuine bonding in relationship with land, which is something that, you know, displacement and sense of belonging again is really key, I think, and can be really exciting about public art. You know, our presence and the things that we make don't have to have explanations. I love that, Lana. It's so true. And you know, I'm creating a community work, and working with a group up in Oakland, and it's such a it's like you have to go back to the history of why there's so many, you know, Native people there that were relocated there, and what would it be like just to have, you know, an earth marker that was, you know, an explanatory just for the community, where there was that sense of awe or sharing in public spaces for non-Native people. Yeah, I'd rather hear y'all. Come on.
You know,
Well,
I
I
have in my
think-
notes. Oh,
Oh,
no, go
sorry,
ahead,
Mark.
Miranda.
What I was saying is that could be a really interesting segue, because I want to make sure that we have enough time to answer any Q&A that happens. But the ethics around public art, right? Like, all public art is on stolen land. I mean, and this idea of marking space, right, that you were just talking about, Brooke, you know, where people came together, and the sovereignty of Indigenous nations and people pre-exists this country and continues to this day. So as artists who work in the public realm as well, how do you navigate the ethics around this idea? Or do you even believe that it holds any water, right? Is that just something, white curators say to make themselves feel better? Like, what are your thoughts about public art being on stolen land?
I would love Gregg to kick this one off because I'm thinking of his one piece that says, if you can read this, Gregg, I'll let you fill in the blanks. Go ahead.
There's this artist that I'm friends with, April Holder, and she has an Instagram account that just genuinely hurts everybody's feelings. And she posted something the other day, and it was questions to ask colonizers. And the first question says, does culturally appropriated meditation methods to elevate your consciousness work while you're occupying stolen land? And I mean, this is a hard discussion. Like when we talk about decolonization, we are doing it in English. We're doing it in the colonizer's language, and while the principles are important, we can't skip out on the irony of the discussion and the language in which we're having the discussion. The truth is that people are performative about it, and that as natives, even, I'll just speak for myself. I'm a Paiute man, part of my community. That is my identity. I'm trying to learn language. I'm trying to pass that on to my children, but I'm also having an American experience. And so because I'm also having an American experience, there ends up being a duality to the identity that I carry. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It is what it is. And because it is what it is, that also puts into question the validity of those discussions with other people, because they have expectations. Your hair is supposed to be long. You're supposed to speak in broken pidgin English. You're supposed to dress a certain way and live in a certain place and have certain facial features. Like I don't have high cheekbones. I have a fat round face, which is traditional among my people. And so, it just, all of this like feeds into this a whole other place. Like before I can even answer that question, we need to discuss like, why is this part of the discussion at all? Because the truth is that like, it's really hard for non-native people to not look performative. And it's really hard for native people to not get pissed at every single bit of this conversation, because it is so incredibly difficult to navigate. Even as somebody who's informed, I find that difficult to navigate, because I want to create work and I want to put work out in public, but I also don't necessarily want to tell everybody what something means. I want something to just be what it is. Or I don't want to fall into the trap that is often thrust upon us, that everything we do and everything we have and each piece of beadwork and each piece of sinew that's used within this bit of regalia has this deep meaning and purpose associated with it. Sometimes it just is what it is.
Yeah.
And so there's a dehumanized aspect to this engagement where we are not working within the bounds of our own identity. We are working within the bounds of the perception of our identity, what people think we are and not what we actually are. And so I don't even know how to answer that question. This is such a difficult thing to talk about. And frankly, some of what I'm saying might not even be very popular, whatever that is, but this is part of the navigation of the work. Yeah. And I totally think I lost sight of the question at hand, but I think it's all still relevant to the question because this is what we're having to do.
Gregg, we have Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth from the Bay Area, friend of mine, asking what that link was to that social media account.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Everyone needs to follow April. She's hilarious.
April, yeah, her Instagram account is and Fluxus. I'll type it in so you guys can see it. But
thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you should follow her on Twitter too. She's also a fabulous printmaker, so you can get like really gorgeous prints from her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, Greg, I think you did. You like, because this is the begin, right? Like this panel was never intended to solve all the problems. This panel is intended for us to start a conversation, right? A bigger conversation about how people who are the gatekeepers and the key holders of sort of public art spaces can learn to build relationships better and be better in relationship, right? With artists and communities that I believe there is a very real desire to work with, but there is definitely a change of mindset that needs to happen. So I think that your answer was actually spot on, you know. And I would love to see Mona or Brooke, you got anything to add?
I'm like chomping at the bits because can we please just figure out a way to do away with all of the Lewis and Clark stuff? Oh my gosh. And that goes for every part of the country. If you're wanting to kind of rectify, you know, public art and monuments, I mean, that's kind of an established domination. They're establishing domination by, like, you know, with Mount Rushmore, with, you know, just every type of monument. And that's, yeah, it's on stolen land. So, you know, TikTok. I seen a woman, she was like, why are we not acknowledging the indigenous tribes of that region's understanding and their connection to that space? That needs funding. That needs to, you know, I'm following, yeah, like I love TikTok because it's like I can follow indigenous content creators. They're talking about the plants. They give the actual name of the plant in their language. That is important knowledge. And it's on TikTok. It's so crazy. And so that doing, you know, like traveling across this country, I've been all over this country, and every time you stop somewhere, they have a sign and it has all this information. It has nothing to do with the tribes that are there. And so that is something that can be changed just, you know, by itself, which would be huge. But, you know, that's how you start. I mean, you have to ask the people of that space what they want, not necessarily what you think they need.
And in order to do that, you have to ask.
Yeah. Build a relationship, building trust by asking them. You know, that's how you build relationships. You know what, we're going to do this for you for a second. You know, we want your advice. We want your opinion. That's how you build relationships and trust.
Because most signage and,
sorry, Mona, I have a note from our earlier discussion that you had said art happens when other life needs are met, right? So
Yeah.
How do collaborators, how do help indigenous lifestyles, right? I mean, let's start there before we start the ask to be on the commission, to be to educate us, to bear the burden of the trauma and educate us. Like, you know, where are collaborators meeting indigenous people more than halfway, all the way to events, to causes that have, you know, that are unselfish.
Children,
I mean,
with the youth. Yeah. I think it starts because in our own communities, we know that our children are our future. And so providing them with the space and the ease to be able to create, like, that is the most important thing. Yeah, you can start from the top and inside and budget building and all that kind of thing, but providing those spaces for kids to be able to create, that's probably one of those ways that they can start. Because I mean, eventually those kids are gonna have the confidence to become artists and use their voices in untethered ways, you know?
I'd love to open it up to Q&A. If anybody in the audience wants to ask a question and drop it into the chat or in the Q&A box, provide space to have our amazing panelists respond to any burning questions you have in your soul. And while we're waiting on anybody to respond to the request for questions, I am curious what projects you guys are working on right now that you're really excited about and want people to check out.
And how we can follow
Yeah.
those projects.
Yeah. Brooke, you want to kick us off with what exciting things you're working on right now?
Sure. I'm working on a project that is community based, and it's going to be able to travel. So the idea is to work with the local Native Indigenous community and the organizations that are there. And I'm starting this up in Oakland with and what it is it's working with the children and the youth and inviting the people of all ages to come together and to have space where we connect body to earth and learn, have just spaces of learning and gathering seasonally. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring up histories, and it's going to bring up diverse personal histories. And we're going to get our hands in the earth and start giving some clay to some children, and introducing a couple principles of earth building, but then allowing them to dreamscape to create markers, and as a community decide on one together and collaboratively build this earth marker, whether it's a fire pit, whether it's a playscape, whether it's a seed saving bank, or whether it's like a primitive sculpture. And this would be then a place of activation where we would then invite a greater public to come and learn about the process and have a different connection to the place underneath them. I find that earth markers, don't really exist for Native and Indigenous people. And I find that the signage and the websites are put us in the past tense, and it's a different time. And it's my dream. I'm calling it Earth Speaks, and I want to work in both urban and natural spaces. And I see it also working with the national parks and national forests, and really starting to build bridges and places for like youth artist residencies in these lands that have been separated and been, places where you have to pay to go in. So getting to start these conversations. And so they're happening in different places. So yeah, you can email me or come to my website, brookesmiley.com. I'm building this with a creative producing partner of all women. And it's really been years, right? And it's been my whole like body of ongoingness, of commitment to step up to all of these disciplines and begin to work with them together towards these things that we're speaking about. So thank you. Yes.
Chat box from Martina. Thanks for this great conversation. I had to join late, so I apologize if you've already talked about this, but do you find yourself having to navigate between having your work considered not contemporary enough and or not traditional enough? We did speak about that. And Martina, we're in the process of getting this recorded, right, Miranda? So we can post that and you'll have that wonderful conversation. Martina has a second question, which is really interesting here. Are any of you working on climate change? And if yes, how?
Well, we just received funding for a project that will be happening in Topeka next year. We're also looking for more funding, of course, applying here and there. One of the parts that we're focusing on is like waterways and preservation of waterways and how to keep them clean. Also educating the children. So those are going to be components of our programming and events. And so something that I wanted to bring to the table too and include in this project is also plants, indigenous plants of the prairie. And so that's kind of where we're starting. We're starting, and once we get more funding, we're going to expand it to have like people from the local tribes come through and teach like a workshop on how to do preservation of indigenous plants. I just think it's important because what I've seen, I'm a transplant from the Pacific Northwest. And so living here now on the prairie and kind of seeing like how the prairies were transformed through agriculture, and then the indigenous plants have, are not even really around anymore because of all of the different farming things that they've done. So in my really meager and humble way, trying to reintroduce indigenous plants into our area again through public art. I think it's important. I think these, you know, these different plants that we had used for our medicines, for our ceremonies, and the knowledge that goes along with it is, I don't want to say it's lost. I don't really like it when people have that narrative of, we're losing this all. No, there's people out there who have that knowledge and they're willing to help share it. So I think that being inclusive of those people's knowledge is important too, and finding them and, you know, bringing that to the table to share with the youth. I think that's really important too.
Is this your next big project, Mona? Did you do like a really slick segue into telling us what you're working on next?
Totally. And what I'm working on is no. No, it is. It's weird wanting to expand it beyond, and I really my current obsession is pollinator plants and indigenous planting and medicines. You know, in my 20s, I took like this really amazing workshop at, up on the Pendleton Cayuse Reservation, and this woman who remembered the one of the dams being built and them damming up the Columbia River. She had all of this amazing plant knowledge about ferns. You can put ferns down underneath where you sleep and the ants will come and get up on your sleeping bed. I mean, different types of bark. If you peel it one way, it'll make you throw up. If you know, it's just, there's so much plant knowledge out there. And so that's always stayed with me since my 20s. And so, yeah, that's just my current obsession, one of them.
I love it. And Gregg, you want to tell us what project you're working on next that we can all be excited about?
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I've got 2 big shows coming up in August here in Colorado. I've one, they're opening a week from each other. So one is in Denver and the other is in Colorado Springs. But I'm working on a couple of little things here and there. I do a lot of bike stuff. So I'm doing a ride, hopefully the end of this month or beginning of next month, from my house to the Sand Creek massacre site. It's about 150 miles. And I'll do it in a day. And I don't know that that's climate change based, but I don't know, maybe there's something in there. And a lot of my work tends to be more observational than anything else in terms of what I create. So I am working on a video piece that is out here in Colorado. It's actually really strange. There's a lot of natural gas pipes everywhere. And they're just in these random places, and these pipes are just like popped up on people's lands, and it has affected grazing lands and the ability for the viability of those grazing lands, because that's the type of farming that they do out here is mostly grazing for cattle and horses, and occasionally alpacas and things like that. But I have a piece that I'm working on that is essentially like a beautiful landscape that has sort of a matrix disruption, and then there's a gas line like right there. And these gas lines are just really strange. Like you can come up on them and like you could smell it, and it's just really disruptive to the landscape, and they're everywhere. And so maybe that's climate change. I think it's super problematic, you know, especially when you start looking at environmental racism, where like the Dakota Access Pipeline was supposed to go by a neighborhood that was mostly white and by Bismarck, and they pulled everything out and ran it past the Standing Rock tribe instead. And so that type of stuff exists here as well, where they like want to run a pipeline by a school, and then everybody protests it and says, no, they don't want that there. And so then they'll put it through like, you know, poor residential neighborhoods and things like that instead. So I'm just kind of working around that a little bit. But right now the show's in August. I'm really concentrated on that. I'm just like making work. The spaces are huge. So I got to fill them up and get everything where they need to be. The show in Denver is going to be about this series I've been working on called The Others, which reappropriates old comic book images from the 40s and 50s and replaces the dialogue of these comics with lyrics from old punk rock songs. And the stuff in Colorado Springs is going to be more conceptual. I have a boarding school piece that I've been working on, and some other stuff that's a little more abstract, which is not really what I've been doing. So that's me dabbling in some other mediums. It's kind of exciting.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate all your time. And Mark, thank you so much for going on this co-facilitation journey with me. Mona, Gregg, and Brooke, you guys have brought an invaluable amount of experience and knowledge to this public art conversation that is usually just all of us admins and curators all talking about what we think we could do to change the world. So thank you for bringing some much needed input and insight into this, and hopefully it'll become a series of conversations that we can all have within our networks. And I'd like to definitely thank Forecast Public Art and the Atlanta Beltline, and definitely Public Art Exchange PAX for giving us this opportunity to have this conversation. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda
Thank you.
and Mark.
Y'all have a beautiful afternoon. Happy summer solstice, everyone. Go out to the
Happy
sunshine.
solstice.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hope to see you all again soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Take care.